Her sisters took everything, but forgot the workshop their grandfather left in 1961. What I found inside wasn't just about the past. It was about whether I could even have a future. If you know what it feels like to start over with nothing but a key and a question, I hope you'll stick around. Maybe even hit that subscribe button, because this is a space for people who understand that the heaviest baggage is the kind you can't see. The bus groaned, a long, weary sound that seemed to come from the very soul of the machine. It was the same sound my own soul had been making for the past 2 years, a low hum of exhaustion I'd almost stopped noticing. I watched the manicured lawns of the suburbs bleed into the ragged, weedy shoulders of country roads. Each mile marker was a tick of the clock, counting down my release and counting up my terror. I was 19 today. 19, and for the first time since I was a child, no one was legally responsible for me. The thought was supposed to feel like freedom. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. In my lap was a worn canvas backpack containing everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a paperback with a cracked spine, and a sealed manila envelope. Inside the envelope was a letter from a lawyer I'd never met and a single, heavy iron key. The key was ancient, the kind you see in old movies, with an ornate, clover-shaped head and a long, complicated shaft. It felt too big, too important for the world I knew, a world of flimsy locks on institutional doors and keycards that beeped you into your designated space. My caseworker, a woman named Ms. Albright who always smelled faintly of peppermint and paperwork, had handed it to me that morning with a look of professional pity. "This is it, Elara. The final piece of your grandparents' estate. It's not much, I'm afraid. Your sisters, well, they handled the rest years ago." She didn't have to elaborate. I knew what handled meant. Chloe and Brianna, 10 and 12 years my senior, had been my guardians on paper after our parents died. In reality, they had been ghosts. They'd sold the house, the car, the furniture, every photograph and teacup, and funneled the money into their own lives on the other side of the country. When the money ran out, so did their sense of familial duty. At 17, I became a ward of the state. They sent birthday cards with no return address, crisp $20 bills tucked inside as if to say, "Here, this absolves me of the sin of forgetting you." The bus hissed to a stop at a crossroads marked by a blinking yellow light and a gas station with peeling paint. "Blackwood Creek," the driver announced to the empty bus. I was the only one left. I grabbed my backpack and walked down the steps, the heavy door sighing shut behind me. The bus pulled away, leaving me in a cloud of diesel fumes and a silence so profound it rang in my ears. The air was different here. It smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and something faintly metallic, like rain on old tin. This was where my mother grew up. This was where my grandparents had lived and died. I had only been here once, for my grandmother's funeral. I was 10. I remembered a white church, the suffocating scent of lilies, and my grandfather's hand, large and calloused, holding mine so tightly it hurt. He'd died a year later, and I wasn't allowed to come for that one. My sister said it was too much school to miss. The lawyer's office was on Main Street, a short, 2-block stretch of brick buildings that looked tired but dignified. The letter had said Davies and Son, attorneys at law, but the gold leaf on the glass door was flaking, and underneath, you could just make out the ghost of another name, one that had been scraped away long ago. The office was a time capsule, filled with the scent of old paper and leather. A man who must have been Mr. Davies sat behind a massive oak desk. He was older, with kind eyes webbed by fine lines, and a suit that was as worn and comfortable as his leather chair. He stood when I entered, a gesture of respect that felt so foreign it almost made me flinch. "Miss Elara Vance?" he asked, his voice a low, gentle rumble. I nodded, unable to find my own. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please, sit. I was sorry to hear about your circumstances. I knew your grandfather. Arthur was a good man, a complicated man, but a good one. He opened a file on his desk, and the rustle of paper was the only sound in the room. "I'll be direct," he said, looking at me over a pair of reading glasses. "There isn't much left. After your grandmother passed, your sisters, as your legal guardians, liquidated the primary estate. The house, the savings. It was all dispensed with." He chose his words carefully, the way you might step around broken glass. By the time of Arthur's death, there wasn't much for them to administer except for one small, overlooked parcel of land. He slid a folded piece of paper across the desk. It was a property deed, yellowed and brittle at the creases. Your grandfather owned a workshop. It's on a separate plot, behind the old homestead. For reasons I was never privy to, he deeded it differently, put it into a small trust that wouldn't mature until your 18th birthday. Your sisters were either unaware of it, or, more likely, they knew it was legally beyond their reach and considered it worthless. It's not in the best shape. He paused, letting the information settle. The problem, Ilara, is the back taxes. They haven't been paid in 3 years. It comes to a little over $2,000. If they aren't paid within the next 90 days, the county will seize the property and sell it at auction. $2,000. He might as well have said $2 million. I had exactly $112 to my name, 80 of it from the last 4 birthday cards from my sisters. "I don't have that kind of money," I said, my voice sounding small and thin. "There's nothing else? No account? No savings?" Mr. Davies shook his head slowly, his expression softening with a genuine sympathy that was worse than Ms. Albright's professional pity. "I'm afraid not. Everything was in your grandmother's name, and then your sister's." He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "There is one other thing. I received an offer on the property last week. A development group, Omnicorp, has been buying up land on the outskirts of town. They're offering $5,000 for the plot. It's not much, but it would clear the taxes and leave you with a couple thousand to get on your feet. It's a standing offer. You just have to say the word." The air in the room suddenly felt thick, heavy. $5,000. It was a fortune. It was a bus ticket to anywhere else. It was a security deposit on a tiny apartment, a month's worth of groceries, a new pair of shoes. It was a clean break. All I had to do was sign a paper, hand over the key to a place I'd never seen, and walk away from the last physical tie I had to a family that had already walked away from me. It was the smart thing to do, the logical thing. The only sensible option for a 19-year-old girl with nothing but a backpack and a history of being left behind. "Why did he do it?" I asked, the question surprising me as much as it did him. "Why deed it separately? Why a trust?" Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I don't know for sure. Arthur was a quiet man, a craftsman. He kept his own counsel. My father handled his affairs for years, and he always said Arthur Vance operated on a different level of logic than most folks. He believed some things had a value that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. Maybe he just wanted to make sure one piece of his world wasn't dispensed with." He slid the key across the desk. It made a soft, scraping sound against the polished wood. My key. "The property is about a mile down the old logging road. The main house is gone, I'm afraid. Your sisters had it torn down. But the workshop is still standing. Barely." He gave me a sad, small smile. "The choice is yours, Ilara. You can sell it sight unseen, or you can go take a look. The offer from Omnicorp stands for 30 days. I looked down at the iron key. It felt heavy in my hand, a solid, tangible piece of a past I barely knew. A place my grandfather had saved, for some reason, just for me. Selling it felt like selling a ghost. It felt like the final betrayal. I closed my hand around the cool metal. "I think I'll go take a look," I said. The words tasted like a promise. Or a mistake. I wasn't sure which. The walk from town was quiet. Too quiet. I was used to the constant noise of the city, the distant sirens, the hum of traffic, the shouting from other rooms in the group home. Here, the only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the gravel shoulder, the rustle of wind in the tall pines that lined the road, and the frantic beating of my own heart. The logging road Mr. Davies had mentioned was more of a dirt track, barely wide enough for one car, and overgrown with weeds that scraped at my jeans. The air grew cooler under the canopy of trees. Light dappled the path in shifting patterns of gold and shadow. It felt like I was walking back in time. After about 15 minutes, the trees thinned, opening onto a clearing, and my heart sank. He'd said the house was gone, but the word didn't prepare me for the reality. It was a scar on the landscape. A concrete foundation, cracked and sprouting weeds, outlined the ghost of a home. A set of crumbling brick steps led up to a phantom front door. This was where my mother had taken her first steps, where my grandmother had baked pies, where a family had lived. Now it was just a concrete wound, a testament to how quickly things can be erased. My sisters hadn't just sold a house, they'd demolished a history. The anger I felt was cold and sharp, a piece of ice in my gut. And then I saw it. Set back from the foundation, half hidden by a thicket of overgrown lilac bushes, was the workshop. It was just as Mr. Davies had described it. The unpainted clapboard siding had weathered to a soft, silvery gray, the color of driftwood. The roof of corrugated tin was rusted in patches, a patchwork of orange and brown. The whole structure leaned slightly to the left, as if tired of standing up straight for so long. It didn't look like a building. It looked like a monument to neglect. A part of me wanted to turn around, walk back to the lawyer's office, and sign the papers. Take the money and run. That was the Vance way, wasn't it? Chloe and Brianna had taught me that. When things get hard, you liquidate and leave. But I kept walking. I pushed through the scratchy branches of the lilac bushes, their dry leaves whispering against my jacket. The closer I got, the more I could see the details. The single window was clouded with decades of grime, a cataract eye staring out at nothing. The large double doors were held shut by a thick, rusted hasp and a heavy-duty padlock that looked far newer than the building itself. But next to them was a smaller, single door, the one my key was for. It was framed by peeling green paint, and the wood was swollen and warped. It looked like it hadn't been opened in a lifetime. My lifetime. I stood before it, my hand trembling slightly as I raised the key. This was it, the last piece, the worthless, forgotten inheritance. I slid the key into the lock. It resisted, grating with rust and disuse. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't turn, that this was the final, pathetic joke. I'd come all this way for a door that wouldn't even open. I put my other hand on the key, took a deep breath, and turned with all my strength. There was a loud, protesting shriek of metal, a series of painful clicks, and then a solid, satisfying thunk as the bolt slid back. The door was unlocked. I pulled my hand back and just stared at the tarnished brass knob. Everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and my future was about to change. I just didn't know if it would be for the better or for the worse. Pushing the door open felt like the biggest decision I had ever made. I placed my palm flat against the weathered wood and pushed. The door groaned, scraping against a warped frame, and swung inward into darkness. The air that rolled out was thick and cool, a self-contained atmosphere that hadn't mingled with the outside world for years. It was the smell of a tomb, but a tomb filled with life's work. It smelled of sawdust, linseed oil, metal shavings, and something else. Something that reminded me of my grandfather. A faint, lingering scent of pipe tobacco and motor oil. It was a ghost of a smell, but it hit me with the force of a memory I didn't know I had. I stepped inside, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. A single beam of dusty sunlight cut through the grimy window, illuminating a billion dancing dust motes. It was like stepping into a photograph from another era. The workshop was one large room, bigger than I'd expected, with a high, raftered ceiling from which a few bare bulbs hung on frayed cords. Against the far wall was a massive workbench, a solid slab of maple scarred with the gouges, burns, and stains of 1,000 projects. Above it, tools hung from a pegboard in neat, obsessive rows. Handsaws with ornate wooden handles, chisels of every size, calipers, squares, and planes that gleamed dully in the dim light. Everything was covered in a thick, uniform blanket of dust, preserving the scene like ash from a volcano. I walked deeper into the room, my boots stirring the dust on the floor into swirling gray clouds. To my left was a hulking shape draped in a canvas tarp. I reached out and pulled a corner of it. Underneath was a lathe, a heavy cast-iron beast from a time when things were built to last forever. Next to it was a drill press and a bandsaw with a blade that had rusted into a solid orange line. This wasn't a hobbyist's garage. This was the sanctuary of a serious craftsman, a man who spoke through the things he made. I ran my hand along the surface of the main workbench. The wood was worn smooth as river stone in some places and rough as bark in others. A half-finished project sat clamped in a vise. A small, intricately carved wooden bird, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. The details were incredible. I could see the fine lines of each individual feather, the tiny, perfect curve of its beak. He had just stopped, mid-carving, and walked away. Why? What had happened? The official story was a heart attack, sudden and massive. But this scene felt different. It felt like an interruption, not an ending. My eyes scanned the shelves lining the walls. They were crammed with coffee cans full of nuts and bolts, jars of mysterious liquids, and stacks of wood of all shapes and sizes. Blonde maple, reddish cherry, dark walnut. It was a library of potential. And then I saw it. Tucked under the main workbench, almost hidden in the deep shadows, was a metal box. It was an old military-style footlocker, painted olive drab, with sturdy latches on the front. It wasn't dusty like everything else. It was clean, as if it had been wiped down recently. But that was impossible. No one had been in here for years. I knelt on the floor, the cold of the concrete seeping through my jeans. I pulled the box out. It was heavy. The latches weren't locked. My heart hammered against my ribs as I lifted the first one, then the second. The sound echoed in the silent workshop. What was I expecting? Money? Gold? Some long-lost family treasure that would solve all my problems? I lifted the lid. My breath caught in my throat. It was filled with paper. Stacks and stacks of letters, bundled together with faded red twine. On top of the first bundle was a single, thick envelope made of creamy, expensive-feeling paper. In elegant, looping cursive, a script I vaguely recognized from the one birthday card he'd ever sent me, was my name. Ilara. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick it up. The paper was cool and smooth to the touch. The envelope wasn't sealed. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out 2 folded sheets of paper. The handwriting was the same, a little shaky in places, but strong and clear. I unfolded them and began to read. My dearest Ilara, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the world has not been as kind to you as I would have wished. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for so much. I am sorry I could not be there to watch you grow. I am sorry that the family I built crumbled into such disarray. There are things you do not know, things I could not explain at the time. Your sisters, they are my granddaughters and I love them, but they inherited your father's recklessness, not your mother's strength. I saw it even when they were young. A hunger for the easy way out. I could not protect the house. Legally, it was to be theirs as your guardians. But this place, this workshop, this is different. This place is mine. And now, it is yours. I know it doesn't look like much. It is old and broken, much like its owner. But it is not empty. Your inheritance is not this building, Alara. It is what is inside it. Your sisters took the money. They always take the money. But they do not know how to build. They only know how to spend. You, I think, are different. I saw it in you, even when you were a little girl. You were a watcher, a thinker. You had my hands. You have your mother's heart. That is a powerful combination. I have not left you a fortune. I have left you a puzzle and a choice. The answers you need are in this workshop. Look for the board that doesn't match. Under the bench where I did my best work. The floor remembers. It will show you the way. Be strong, my girl. Your grandmother and I are watching over you. Trust the work. Trust yourself. With all my love, Grandfather Arthur. I read the letter a second time, and then a third. The words blurred through a film of tears I didn't know I was crying. I cried for the grandfather I never got to know. I cried for the little girl who had felt so utterly alone for so long. And I cried because for the first time, someone had seen me. Not as a burden, not as a case file, not as a problem to be solved or a check to be written, but as a person. You had my hands. You have your mother's heart. The words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still open. He had seen me. He had made a plan. A strange, cryptic plan, but a plan nonetheless. A puzzle. I wiped my eyes with the back of my dusty hand, smearing grime across my face. I looked around the workshop again. It didn't look like a derelict building anymore. It looked like a map. Look for the board that doesn't match. Under the bench where I did my best work. I crawled back over to the main workbench, my eyes scanning the floorboards beneath it. They were wide planks of old pine, dark with age and oil stains. And there, right under the spot where the half-finished bird sat in the vise, was one board that was slightly shorter than the others. The grain was different, the color a shade lighter. It was so subtle I never would have noticed it if I hadn't been looking. I pressed my fingers into the seam. It was tight. I tried to pry it up with my nails, but they just bent. I needed a tool. I looked up at the pegboard, a perfect arsenal hanging just out of reach. I grabbed a wide-bladed chisel and a small hammer. I wedged the tip of the chisel into the crack and gently tapped the handle with the hammer. The wood groaned in protest. I tapped again, harder this time. A splinter of wood popped free. I worked the chisel back and forth, slowly, carefully, until the board began to lift. Finally, with a low squeal of old nails, it came loose. I pulled it up and set it aside. Beneath it was a dark, square hole, a cavity in the subfloor. And nestled inside that cavity was another box. This one was larger, a heavy-duty steel chest, the kind used to store firearms or important documents. It had a combination lock on the front. My hope, which had been soaring moments before, crashed. A combination lock. It was hopeless. How could I possibly know the combination? I sat back on my heels, the cold of the floor a solid, unforgiving reality. It was a cruel joke. He'd led me this far, only to leave me at another locked door. I felt a surge of the old, familiar despair. Of course it was impossible. Everything was always impossible. My life was a series of locked doors with missing keys. I ran my hands over the cold steel of the box, defeated. My fingers traced the dial of the lock. 3 numbers. It could be anything. A birthday? An anniversary? I didn't know any of those dates. And then I stopped. My fingers were resting on the top of the box. I could feel something there, not dust, but a fine, gritty residue. I rubbed it between my thumb and forefinger. It was graphite. Pencil dust. I looked closer. Faintly, so faintly I could barely see them in the dim light, were 3 numbers, written in pencil on the lid of the box, right above the lock. They had been smudged and worn away by time, almost invisible. It looked like 1961, 1961, the year from the story title my mind conjured. No, that wasn't right. Wait, I squinted. The first number was a 7. The second was a 3. The third was a 5. 735. It meant nothing to me, a random sequence of numbers. But it was the only clue I had. My heart started to pound again, a frantic, hopeful rhythm. I turned the dial, right to 7. Left past 7 to 3. Right to 5. I pulled the shackle. It didn't move. My stomach dropped. Of course not. It was just a smudge. Just a meaningless number. I tried again, more carefully this time, making sure the numbers aligned perfectly with the marker. Right to 7. Left to 3. Right to 5. I gripped the shackle and pulled. There was a loud, solid clack that echoed through the workshop like a gunshot. It was open. If you've ever felt that lurch in your stomach, that moment where everything you thought was true is about to be turned upside down, then you know exactly how I felt. It's a terrifying and thrilling moment, the second before you open the box. For anyone who has been through that, who has had to face a truth that could change everything, I see you. This part of the journey is always the hardest. If you're finding some strength in this story, I'd be honored if you'd leave a comment. Knowing you're out there helps more than I can say. Okay, let's get back to that box. I took a deep breath, the dusty air filling my lungs, and I lifted the heavy steel lid. The contents were packed tightly, a dense archive of a hidden life. There was no cash, no gold, no easy answer. It was better than that. It was a legacy. On top was a thick, leather-bound journal. I lifted it out. It was heavy, filled with his familiar, elegant script. Beneath it were stacks of papers held together with metal clips. They were blueprints, dozens of them, for intricate tools, complex furniture designs, and mechanical wooden toys that seemed impossibly clever. And under the blueprints were legal documents, thick sheaves of paper tied with ribbon, bearing the seals of patent offices and law firms. These weren't just ideas, they were protected, registered, and owned. At the very bottom of the box was one last letter, in the same creamy envelope as the first. I opened it with a reverence I didn't know I possessed. Alara, if you have found this, you have passed the first test. You were patient. You were observant. You did not give up. These are the qualities of a builder. Now for the truth. When your mother fell in love with your father, I was happy for her, but I was also afraid. He was a charming man, but he was a gambler. Not with cards, but with life. He took risks, chased get-rich-quick schemes, and always believed the big score was just around the corner. Your mother's inheritance, which was substantial, disappeared in less than 5 years. They were always one bad investment away from disaster. I helped them, again and again, but it was like pouring water into a sieve. When you were born, I knew I had to do something different. I couldn't let your future be gambled away too. So I began to separate my life's work. I was never just a carpenter, Ilara. I was an inventor. The tools I built, the techniques I developed, they were unique. I filed patents. I started a small, independent company on paper. And I funneled every penny I made from it into a trust. A trust in your name, untouchable by anyone until you came of age. This workshop, this land, it is the physical headquarters of that trust. Your sisters know nothing of this. When I died, all they saw was an old man's hobby, a shed full of junk. They never looked closer. They never saw the value in the work, only in the cash. The money in the house was theirs to take. This is yours to build. Inside this box is everything you need. The patents are still active. Some are timeless. The designs for my hand planes are, I say with humility, nearly perfect. The world has moved on to cheap, disposable things, but there is always a market for quality. There is also a bank book in here for an account tied to the trust. It isn't a fortune, but there's enough to pay the back taxes a dozen times over and give you a runway to start. There is also the deed to this land, free and clear, protected by the trust. This is your choice now, my dear granddaughter. You can take the money from the account, sell the patents to a tool company, the blueprints will show you their value, and walk away with a comfortable sum. Start a new life and forget all this. There is no shame in that. Or you can stay. You can learn the trade. You can bring this workshop back to life. You can build things of beauty and permanence in a world that has forgotten how. You can continue the work. The combination for the lock, 735, was your mother's birth weight. 7 pounds, 3.5 ounces. I wanted the key to your future to be the memory of her beginning. She would be so proud of the woman you have become. Whatever you choose, know that you were loved, fiercely and completely. Your grandfather, Arthur. I sat on the dusty floor of the workshop, the letter in my hand, and I wept. I wept for the years of feeling like a cast-off, an afterthought. I wept for the grandparents I had lost too soon. I wept for the mother I barely remembered. But this time, the tears weren't just from grief. They were from a profound, earth-shattering sense of relief. I wasn't an accident. I wasn't a burden. I was a plan. I was the destination of a long, secret journey. My entire life, I had been defined by what was taken from me. My parents, my home, my family. But my grandfather hadn't allowed everything to be taken. He had saved something. He had saved me. I spent the next hour poring over the contents of the box. The journal was filled with his thoughts, his sketches, his frustrations, and his triumphs. It was like having a conversation with him across time. The blueprints were masterpieces of technical drawing, precise and beautiful. The patents were dense with legal language, but the titles told a story. Self-centering dowel jig, compound angle marking gauge, non-fatiguing ergonomic chisel handle. It was the vocabulary of a life spent in pursuit of perfection. And then there was the bank book. I opened it, my hands shaking. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before his death. The balance was just over $75,000. It had been sitting there, untouched, accruing a tiny amount of interest for years. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was a beginning. I packed everything carefully back into the steel chest, except for the bank book and the deed. I closed the lid, slid the board back into place over the secret compartment, and stood up. The workshop looked different now. The dust and grime were still there, but they no longer looked like neglect. They looked like potential. The silent tools weren't relics. They were waiting. The whole building seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for a decision. And in my heart, I knew the decision had already been made. The idea of selling, of handing this place over to a faceless corporation to be bulldozed, was unthinkable. It would be the real betrayal. It would be telling my grandfather that his life's work, his faith in me, was worth nothing more than a quick payout. It would be proving my sisters right. I was not my sisters. I walked out of the workshop and back into the sunlight, blinking against the brightness. I pulled out my phone. The battery was at 20%. I had 1 bar of service. I found the business card Mr. Davies had given me and dialed his number. He answered on the second ring. "Davies and Son." "Mr. Davies, it's Ilara Vance," I said, my voice steadier than I thought it would be. "Ah, Ilara, have you had a chance to look at the property? Have you given any thought to the offer from Omnicore?" There was a pause. I looked back at the leaning, weathered workshop, standing silent and patient amongst the weeds. It was ugly, it was forgotten, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was home. "Yes, I have," I said, a smile spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like years. Please tell them the offer is rejected. The property is not for sale. I heard a surprised silence on the other end of the line. And Mr. Davies, I continued, I think you and I need to talk. I'd like to schedule an appointment to discuss the administration of my grandfather's trust. I'm going to need to pay some back taxes. The meeting with Mr. Davies the next morning was a quiet revelation. I laid the bank book, the deed, and a sampling of the patents on his massive oak desk. He put on his reading glasses and examined each document with a lawyer's meticulous focus, his eyebrows climbing higher with each page he turned. He looked up at me, his calm, professional demeanor completely gone, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated astonishment. "My word," he whispered, looking from the papers back to me. "Arthur, you clever old fox." He never said a word. My own father handled his will, and he never mentioned any of this. He shook his head in disbelief. A separate corporation, patents, a funded trust. Ilara, this isn't an inheritance, it's a succession plan. He explained the legalities in a way I could understand. The trust was ironclad. The ownership of the patents was clear. The money in the account was mine, free and clear. He helped me arrange the wire transfer to the county tax office. The feeling of writing a check for over $2,000, of solving my biggest problem with a simple signature, was dizzying. It was the first time in my life I had wielded any real power over my own circumstances. We spent the rest of the morning mapping out a plan, establishing my control of the trust, assessing the commercial viability of the patents, and creating a small business account. As I was leaving, he paused, his hand on the door. "There is one other matter, Ilara," he said, his tone turning serious. "Regarding your sisters. The liquidation of your grandmother's estate, given what Arthur has written here about their character, and the fact they seem to have conveniently ignored this significant asset, there could be grounds to investigate their administration of the estate. There might be evidence of fraud, or, at the very least, gross negligence. You could potentially sue to recover some of what was lost." The thought was tempting. A hot, satisfying flash of vengeance. I imagined their faces, Chloe and Brianna, when they received a legal notice. I imagined forcing them to account for every dollar they had spent, for every piece of our family they had sold off. But then I looked through the dusty glass of the office door at the quiet main street of Blackwood Creek. I thought of my grandfather's letter. They do not know how to build. They only know how to spend. A lawsuit would be about spending time, energy, and emotion on tearing something down. It would be an act of demolition, just like the one they'd committed on our family home. I was tired of things being torn down. "No," I said, the word feeling firm and right in my mouth. "Not right now. My focus needs to be on building something up, not tearing them down. Let them have the past. I'm interested in the future." "Mr." Davies nodded slowly, a look of respect in his eyes. "I think your grandfather would be very proud to hear you say that." I walked out of his office and into the crisp autumn air, feeling lighter than I had in years. The first thing I did was walk to the local hardware store. It was a magical place, smelling of fresh-cut lumber, fertilizer, and oil. An older man with a kind, weathered face and sawdust in his hair watched me as I wandered the aisles, looking at tools I didn't yet know how to use. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked. "I'm looking for cleaning supplies," I said. "Heavy duty, for an old workshop." His eyes lit up with recognition. "You must be the Vance girl, Arthur's granddaughter. Heard someone was finally back at the old place." He stuck out a calloused hand. "Frank, I own this place, knew your grandfather well, or as well as anyone could. He was a master, that one. Some of the tools he made, they were works of art. The world's got no time for that kind of patience anymore." He smiled a sad, genuine smile. "It's good to see a light back on in that workshop. It's been dark for too long." That small exchange, that simple acknowledgement of my existence and my connection to this place, was a stronger anchor than any amount of money in the bank. I wasn't just a stranger anymore. I was Arthur Vance's granddaughter. I belonged to this place, and it belonged to me. I bought buckets, mops, sponges, rags, and a huge container of industrial-strength cleaner. I spent the next week engaged in the slow, arduous, and deeply satisfying work of reclamation. I started by washing the one large window. It took 3 buckets of black water and a whole roll of paper towels, but when I was done, sunlight, clear and unfiltered, streamed into the workshop for the first time in a decade. The light changed everything. It chased the deepest shadows from the corners and revealed the true character of the space. It wasn't just a building, it was a cathedral of craft. Each day, I would tackle a new section. I swept away thick blankets of dust and cobwebs. I scrubbed the oil-stained floors on my hands and knees. I took every single tool down from the pegboard, cleaned the rust from it with steel wool and oil, sharpened the blades on an old whetstone I found, and polished the wooden handles until they gleamed. As I worked, I felt a strange connection to my grandfather. My hands were holding the same tools his had held. I was learning the heft of the hammer, the bite of the chisel, the smooth glide of the plane. I wasn't just cleaning a room, I was reawakening a spirit. I found more of his personality tucked away in drawers and on high shelves. A collection of bird feathers, a worn copy of Moby Dick with his notes in the margins, a half-eaten bag of petrified caramels, a framed photo, face down in a drawer, of my grandmother, young and smiling, standing in the doorway of the workshop. Underneath it, in his familiar script, he had written, "My Foundation." Each discovery was a new verse in the poem of his life. The physical labor was exhausting, but my mind was clear. I thought about inheritance. My sisters had inherited money. It was an asset that could be counted, spent, and exhausted. When it was gone, it was gone. My grandfather had left me something different. He had left me work. He had left me a skill to learn, a space to create, and a legacy to continue. It was an inheritance that would grow with effort. The more I put into it, the more it would give back. It was a living thing. Home, I realized, wasn't a structure you were given. It wasn't the house my sisters had torn down. It was a place you made. It was the act of building itself. The workshop wasn't my home because a deed said so. It was becoming my home because I was pouring my sweat, my hope, and my grief into its very bones. I was sanding away the neglect and polishing the potential, both in the building and in myself. One evening, I stood in the center of the clean, organized space. The tools were sharp and ready. The workbenches were clear. The floor was clean enough to eat off of. The setting sun cast long, golden shafts of light through the clean window, illuminating the space with a warm, hopeful glow. I picked up the half-finished wooden bird from the vise. I ran my thumb over the smooth, carved feathers. I sat down on my grandfather's stool, picked up one of his favorite carving knives, and for the first time, I set the blade to wood. I didn't know what I was doing, not really, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was finally home. The first cut was clumsy. The knife skipped, leaving a jagged little scar on the bird's wing. I winced, feeling like I had betrayed some sacred trust. But then I remembered my grandfather's journal. On the first page, he had written, "The first mistake is the beginning of the lesson." So I took a breath, adjusted my grip, and tried again. This time, a perfect, paper-thin curl of wood spiraled up from the blade. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. For the next few weeks, my life found a new rhythm. I'd wake up with the sun, make coffee on a small hot plate I'd bought, and spend the day in the workshop. I started with the basics, reading my grandfather's journals and technical books I'd ordered online. I learned about the properties of wood, the tight grain of maple, the rich scent of cedar, the forgiving nature of pine. I practiced, I made sawdust. I made mistakes. A lot of them. My first attempts at dovetail joints looked more like jagged teeth. My first finished project, a small, wobbly stool, was a monument to imperfection. But I kept it. It was proof that I was trying. Slowly, painstakingly, something began to shift. My hands started to understand the language of the tools. I learned to feel the grain of the wood, to listen to the sound of a sharp plane slicing through cherry, to know by instinct the right amount of pressure to apply. I finished the little bird my grandfather had started. I sanded it smooth and oiled it until the grain shone like a tiger's eye. I placed it on the windowsill, its wings forever outstretched towards the light. It was a collaboration across time. My community grew in small, quiet ways. Frank, the owner of the hardware store, became a mentor. I'd bring him my failed projects, and he'd show me where I went wrong with a patient smile. The woman who ran the local diner started saving the corner booth for me, knowing I'd be in for dinner every night, covered in sawdust. The mail carrier started leaving my packages on the workshop steps with a friendly wave. They were small gestures, but for a girl who had spent years feeling invisible, they were everything. They were the threads of connection, weaving me into the fabric of this small town. One afternoon, a sleek, black car I didn't recognize pulled up the dirt road. A man in an expensive suit got out, looking profoundly out of place against the backdrop of weeds and rusty tin. He introduced himself as a representative from Omnicorp. "I know you rejected our initial offer," he said, his smile all polish and no warmth. "But we've been authorized to increase it, substantially. $25,000, cash. You could be on a bus out of this forgotten town by nightfall." He gestured dismissively at the workshop. "Let us take this old shack off your hands." A year ago, I would have jumped at the offer. It was more money than I had ever dreamed of. But standing there, in front of the place I had poured my entire being into, the offer felt like an insult. He wasn't just offering to buy a building, he was offering to buy my future, my grandfather's legacy, my newfound home. And it wasn't for sale. "Thank you," I said, my voice calm and even. "But my answer is the same. I'm not leaving." He stared at me, genuinely confused that someone could turn down easy money. He saw a worthless shack. I saw a life. He shrugged, got back in his car, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. I had won. It wasn't a loud, dramatic victory, but a quiet, firm one. The best kind. My grandfather taught me that the most valuable things are not the ones you are given, but the ones you have to rebuild yourself. He left me a broken-down workshop, but he also left me a blueprint for a new life. The greatest inheritance wasn't the patents or the money. It was the chance to discover that I was stronger than I ever thought, that I could build something beautiful and lasting out of the pieces I had been left. This workshop, this town, this life, it's not perfect. There are still scars. There are days when the loneliness is a physical weight. But now, it's a life of my own making. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to find strength in a place that others called broken, I invite you to join our community. Subscribe, and if you feel comfortable, share a piece of your own story in the comments. Because we all have a workshop of our own to rebuild. We're all just trying to find our way home, one careful cut at a time. Thank you for listening.